Who are some of the craziest serial criminals out there? Well, let's get straight to it, starting with number 5, Tony Tabin. Tony Tabin goes by many names and commits many crimes. Some people call him Don Solo, others simply call him Yee. A few others call him Mukisa Okello, and in some records, he's named Big Poppa. But here's the thing about our man Tabin. No matter what name he was using, he was always up to some criminal mischief. According to police reports, he started his criminal lifestyle in Australia, where he was a wanted man. And his crime? Serial bank robbery. He made a life out of depositing stolen checks at banks to make a huge payday. And as his crimes were discovered, Tony Tabin didn't just wait around to get caught by the police. Instead, he snuck away to Uganda, where he hid for 2 years. And after those 2 years, he ran off to South Sudan, where he also committed a slew of crimes before finally returning to Uganda. In Uganda, Tabin started dating a pretty popular TV personality named Zahara Toto. She's sort of a Ugandan Wendy Williams. Toto thought, or at least she said she thought, that Tabin was from some wealthy Australian family, which we know isn't true. Apparently, he had given Toto a BMW as a gift, but it turned out that the car actually belonged to a South Sudanese tycoon living in Uganda. Just imagine the awkward conversation that must have went down when both Toto and the unnamed tycoon walked out into the parking lot and tried to unlock the same car. Awkward. It probably didn't happen like that, but we can dream. Anyway, Tabin has also committed several crimes in Kenya. He's wanted for depositing several bad checks and fraudulently purchasing 55-inch televisions. He's also wanted for spending nights in luxury hotels without paying. Sadly for Tony, he was eventually caught by the Nairobi police. He was taken to court and charged with forgery and illegal entry into Kenya. Maybe when he's thrown in jail, which most assuredly he will be, he can change his name again to Sally Jail Birdington, or something equally fancy. Number 4, champagne and Rolexes. Mansoor Kiani was pouring champagne on his Rolex one day, like you do, and cooling his heels in prison the next. Here's the thing about dear Mr. Kiani. He's a pharmacist, but not the sort of pharmacist who goes to school and works in a hospital. Instead, he's a street pharmacist who sells all manner of spicy and illegal street medicine to people. Kiani made a lot of money from this business, which meant he had to hide his business from the police. His way of doing this was to use an encrypted phone communication system called EncroChat. But police eventually nailed EncroChat for allowing a bunch of shady things to happen, seized the servers, and were privy to the messages that Kiani was sending his underground business partners, among like a million other bad guys. Using the information from the servers of EncroChat, the police were able to track down Kiani and arrest him. And once he was arrested, they got videos and pictures of Kiani living a large life. And yes, they also saw videos of him washing his very expensive Rolex watch with very expensive champagne in a very expensive club. But those days are now over, as he faced a very long sentence. And he's spending that sentence in a very cheap room, wearing very cheap clothes, and probably wearing no watch at all. And whatever he ended up covered in probably wasn't bling and champagne. Number 3, 58 identities. Harley Davidson lived like a royal by stealing the identities of at least 58 fellow Australians. Davidson would steal the personal information of her victims, such as their driver's licenses, dates of birth, and addresses, and then use that information to open accounts with buy now, pay later businesses. She would then use those accounts to shop and purchase expensive items for herself. Of course, she never paid those accounts back and left her victims to bear the burden of an awful credit rating. Once Davidson opened these accounts, she went on a $19,000 shopping extravaganza. She bought everything she ever wanted to buy. This includes injectable cosmetics, jewelry, IKEA furniture, which is like, okay, IKEA? She's being budget conscious with her stolen money? Maybe she just went in for those Swedish meatballs or those hot dogs and walked out with some furniture she has to build with those weird wrenches, like she's a handyman or something. Anyway, she also grabbed a 55-inch TV, shoes, Airbnb stays, and even rideshare services. She essentially eventually stopped working and made stealing identities her full-time job. The scam was so complex that Davidson needed a ton of SIM cards just to run it. These cards were used to receive emails and verification texts using her victims' information. Since she didn't have access to their actual phones, Davidson just used her different SIM cards in her own phone instead. When police finally raided her home, they discovered just how extensive her scheme was. They found 96 SIM cards in a toolbox and also found 2 pieces of paper filled with credit card details and identity information. They also found evidence on a phone recovered from the house with texts where Davidson was impersonating her victims to complete setting up buy now, pay later accounts. So how did Davidson even put this scheme together? Well, according to the police, it all started when Davidson realized that she could mix and match the details of various victims to get lines of credit and purchase products without actually paying. And once she started doing it, she got really good at it really quickly. Her top 3 most unfortunate targets saw her use nearly $10,000 in credit. Davidson wasn't just a random credit scammer either. She also did a little illegal substance wheeling and dealing on the side. When the police raided her home, they found a safe containing 2 resealable bags with some very magical crystals. Davidson has since pleaded guilty to 70 charges, including dozens of counts of fraud, possessing stolen goods, and contraband possession. As of the release of this video, she's awaiting sentencing. Great. Now we've got a craving for those IKEA hot dogs and modern-looking shelves. Number 2. A Needier Scammer. Robert Riley Saunders stole thousands of dollars from the Ministry of Children and Family Development in Kelowna, British Columbia. In total, Saunders stole about $460,000 from the ministry, and it's possible he stole even more. But Saunders didn't steal all of this money at once. Instead, he instituted a systematic process that ensured that he could steal as much money from the ministry that was helping kids as he wanted without any alarm bells going off. The scam itself was ingeniously simple. Saunders would open a joint account in his name and the name of a kid who was entitled to money from the ministry. He would then cause checks to be issued payable to that youth to that joint account. Since Saunders had access to the joint account, he could easily withdraw the money from the account to his own account, which he had sole control over. Yeah, Saunders doesn't exactly sound like the best type of person. The clever part of this scam is that a vast majority of the checks were small affairs under $600. Since Saunders could issue these checks at least once a month per person, he had a never-ending gravy train of stolen child funds. Over 6.5 years, Saunders opened 24 such joint bank accounts and issued around 850 ministry checks that he eventually withdrew for himself. Saunders could have gotten away with it for as long as he wanted. There was no hole in the balance sheet, no one was reporting anything, and nothing looked off about Saunders. Unfortunately for him, his regular supervisor went on vacation and another person stepped in as his team lead, and then his fraud was uncovered and he was promptly arrested. Like most criminals, Saunders tried to share the blame for his behavior. First, he said that the 24 young people that he stole from weren't really entitled to the money. Therefore, the crime was basically victimless, said Saunders, which is obviously not true, since the money had to come from somewhere and was intended to go into an account that had nothing to do with Robert Saunders. Even if those kids weren't allegedly entitled to that money, some other kid was. And Saunders here only thought about himself. He used the money to purchase a nice house and nice cars and took expensive vacations when he could. He used to earn $4,000 per month when he started his scheme, but 2 years into it, he was earning roughly $12 grand a month. When his dumb excuse bombed like you knew it would, Saunders tried telling the judge that he regretted his actions and had even contemplated kicking the bucket in his own way, if you catch our drift. He also said he could no longer find work and his 2 adult children have essentially disassociated themselves from him. And the judge said, "Oh," and gave Saunders 5 years in prison, where it's probable someone will be rerouting his commissary to another cell. Hopefully he learns the lesson of not stealing from needy kids. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out how these despicable people use charities to line their pockets. Number 1. Don't worry, I'm famous. Mehdi Abalimba duped a former Love Island star by pretending to be a high-class soccer player when he was merely a non-league player who earned no more than £300 per month. But if you saw Abalimba, you would never believe that not only was he just a non-league player, he also worked as a taxi driver part-time. Abalimba, who once played for Derby County and once had an exciting future as a soccer star, couldn't quite make it in the big leagues due to injury problems. So, to supplement his income, Abalimba found a new position to play: fraudster. Abalimba started small. He began by breaking into lockers of the private health clubs he trained at and photographing the credit cards of wealthy patrons. He then posed as Chelsea football player Gael Kakuta and paraded himself around London, running up huge tabs which he either didn't pay, got someone else to pay, or paid with stolen credit cards. Taking no time at all, he had stolen close to £50,000. The authorities eventually caught up with him when he attempted to purchase £11,000 worth of clothes through the driver of a limo he'd no doubt got through illegal means. Abalimba eventually had his day in court and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. But even that wasn't enough to stop Abalimba from continuing a life of crime. In prison, he exploited a vulnerable 50-year-old nurse by getting into a relationship with her. The unnamed nurse even smuggled in a phone, and only God knows what he did with that phone. When Abalimba eventually got out of prison, he resumed his life of crime by targeting Love Island star Georgia Steele. He told Steele that he was an ex-U.S. serviceman and worked for a U.S. government agency, so he couldn't take pictures with her or own a social media account. He also told her that he didn't know her at all and had never heard of Love Island. He then said his name was Miguel Johnson. Unfortunately, Georgia believed all his lies, and they dated for 6 weeks. In fact, she introduced him to her family at her 21st birthday party. It wasn't until the paparazzi took pictures of her and Abalimba that her agent told her she was dating an ex-con fraudster. Sadly, Georgia didn't believe it until she found out he had spent £32,000 on her credit cards. So she confronted Abalimba, but he denied her accusations and stormed out of her home. And yet, Abalimba wasn't done. His next mark was the ex-wife of football star Thierry Henry, Claire Henry. While he was dating Claire, he was arrested for other crimes and put in the slammer for another 4 months. But something like a little jail sentence didn't disrupt Abalimba's scamming of Henry. He made sure to speak to her every day for 4 months and told her that he'd been sent on a military assignment to Kuwait. In any case, he eventually stole £50,000 from Claire. Thankfully, he didn't get away with it and has now been jailed for another 4 years. To learn more about how crazy this guy got with his scamming, and we only scratched the surface here, he got a little nuts with a limo. Click here for a deeper dive on Mehdi Abalimba. These are the fundraisers you don't want to donate your hard-earned money to. Let's get right into it with number 6, Not a Cop Charity. The Robert L. Zohr Foundation was created to support the families of fallen police officers by Rosemary Zohr in 2018. Zohr founded the organization to honor her father, a Miami-Dade police officer who was killed in the line of duty in 1983 when Rosemary was only 7 years old. Zohr and her husband, Michael Randall, faced criminal charges after failing to properly register the foundation with the state of Florida and embezzling funds from the nonprofit. Zohr also failed to meet federal and state requirements for tax-exempt status. As investigators looked further into the nonprofit, they found that there were inadequacies in the foundation's bank records. Between 2019 and 2020, nearly $35,000 was transferred from the foundation's bank account into Zohr's personal bank account. Zohr had claimed that she received no financial compensation from the foundation, but she had secretly added herself to the foundation's payroll and received $4,500 in payments between September and November of 2020. Zohr wasn't just saving the transferred money for a rainy day. The investigation found that the Fallen Officers Foundation made a $500 child support payment in Ohio, a $100 payment to a chiropractor, and a $216 payment to a masseuse. In addition to raising money for families of fallen officers, the organization also claimed to fund scholarships for youths interested in joining law enforcement and was raising funds for a memorial monument in Naples. Zohr and her husband claimed the monument had the blessing of elected officials, but the county commission hadn't voted on the proposal. As donations to the organization continued to fill bank accounts, Zor took the opportunity to further her own political interests by inviting Republican politicians and far-right celebrities to speak at foundation events. The foundation raised money by hosting monthly cover band concerts and a handful of flag football tournaments, and through a gala in March 2020. These events almost always featured a lineup of pro-Donald Trump speakers. Zor also sold Back the Blue merchandise on the fallen officer's website. Zor and her husband insisted they had nothing to hide, despite having failed to file tax returns in 2019 and 2020 and failing to register the nonprofit within the state. They also claimed that the organization was non-political, that it was only about law enforcement and had nothing to do with any political leanings. Rosemary Zor now faces felony criminal charges, and her husband faces a single felony charge of failing to register as a professional solicitor after he took a cut of the donation proceeds while serving as vice president for the charity. Number 5. Golf charity cheater. In sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, Robert Alexander set out to make his life just a little bit sunnier at the expense of a few unsuspecting do-gooders. Alexander now faces fraud charges after allegedly duping golfers into donating to a fake charity event benefiting the Wounded Warrior Project. Alexander began his scheme by approaching people who were out for a day on the links. He would play a few holes with them to build a rapport, then would ask the golfers if they would like to participate in a charity golf event. For victim Lindsay Meisner, the Wounded Warrior Project, which services military veterans, hit close to home, as she's an Army veteran herself. Meisner generously donated $10,000 to Alexander for the charity, and she claims that she donated it in cash. Alexander insisted that cash was better tax-wise, but after accepting the money, Alexander vanished. Meisner's calls and texts to Alexander weren't going through, and she never heard from him again. 2 other victims came forward and explained that they had donated $900 and $700 to Alexander under similar pretenses, believing that they were paying some sort of entrance fee to participate in a charity event. One golfer uncovered the scam after calling the venue and discovering that the event wasn't scheduled. Meanwhile, Alexander the scammer was running another scam. He was pawning off fake coupon books for the alleged benefit of schools. Evidence documents show that someone wrote Alexander a check worth $5,000 to resell the coupon books. As evidence stacked up against Alexander with more victims coming forward, he was finally arrested. Funny enough, this wasn't Alexander's first offense. He had formerly spent several years in federal prison after conviction for a Ponzi-like scheme in which he promised investors big financial returns on golf ball investments. This charge required him to pay $382,000 in restitution. Robert Alexander pleaded not guilty to his charges of fraudulent schemes after his arrest and is currently behind bars waiting for his next hearing. One thing's for certain, Alexander has a pattern and a history with golf course schemes, so do your research before handing over cash on the course. Number 4. Fake cancer scam. Nicole Elkabas, an ex-Harrods fashion consultant, was found guilty of setting up a fraudulent GoFundMe page in 2018 where she claimed she had cancer. Elkabas racked up some 45,000 euros in donations, but she didn't stop there. Elkabas faced further allegations linked to a fraudulent boxing charity event and the Broadstairs Town Boxing Team Project, The Shed. The Shed is a woodworking organization for the elderly, but it provides more than tools to create wooden masterpieces. For many elderly members of the organization, the Shed is a form of social interaction with like-minded people, and Elkabas received around 10,000 euros that were meant to be donated to the group. After donating the charity money to herself, Elkabas was eventually convicted of fraud and possession of criminal property in the form of charitable donations. In her mitigation, Elkabas posted a photo lying in a hospital bed claiming that she needed money for a life-saving treatment for ovarian cancer. The photo wasn't a depiction of a cancer-ridden Elkabas, but rather a short recovery period after a routine operation to remove her gallbladder. The doctor must have accidentally removed her conscience as well. Additionally, the post allegedly came from Elkabas's mother, who actually suffers from cancer, but it was likely posted by Elkabas herself. Once the photo had been posted, Elkabas took matters into her own hands and set up a GoFundMe page titled "Nicole Needs Our Help Treatment." She wrote about the hardships yet to come in the form of surgery and grueling chemotherapy, and described herself as a loving mum who needed cash to to save her life. Ultimately, Elkebus's consultant oncologist outed her after realizing the photo wasn't taken in the hospital Elkebus claimed to be in, and the authorities began to explore the cracks in her story. The doctor that was claimed to have overseen Elkebus's treatment didn't exist, and her bank account revealed absurd amounts of online and casino gambling. Although she was eventually caught, this wasn't without Elkebus making out with some 4,000 euros in donations that were spent on fancy hotels abroad and in casinos. Despite Elkebus's initial luck with scamming well-wishers out of money, scams don't last forever, and the authorities caught up to her. She was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison on clear and compelling evidence. In fact, the evidence was so clear and compelling, it seemed that Elkebus didn't even try to hide her misdoings at all. Other than a fairly short jail sentence, Elkebus was only required to pay back a ridiculous €5 within a 28-day period. The order was made after authorities realized Elkebus had no assets or really any way to pay back the defrauded cash without running another scam. In hopes of ending Elkebus's cycle of scams, authorities kept her payment low. Number 3. The worst friend ever. How far would you go for your dream wedding? For Tori Standen of Winds, Cheshire, a fake terminal illness was the limit. Standen told family and friends that she had been diagnosed with terminal vaginal cancer and provided supporters with regular updates on her treatment with intimate detail, so her condition was never questioned. Standen even shaved her head to further convince others she was undergoing intense chemotherapy and shared the photos on social media. Claiming she had only 2 months to live, her friends acted by setting up a GoFundMe page to help her and her partner James have the wedding she deserved before she fell too ill. Friends of Standen raised €8,500 to support this dream wedding. Standen said her last wish was to have her father Derek, who was also dying of cancer, walk her down the aisle. Her father passed before the wedding, but the celebrations carried on. After the wedding ceremony, Standen and her husband flew off to a honeymoon in Turkey and enjoyed an additional holiday months later, traveling through Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Italy. Friends began to grow suspicious as the newlyweds globetrotted. Standen appeared to be some sort of medical miracle, far outliving her original diagnosis. Eventually, she admitted that she didn't have cancer during a 3-way phone call with friends, which the friends recorded. Standen apologized and said she felt embarrassed. Despite admitting her falsified death sentence, Standen accepted interviews with local newspapers to garner public sympathy. Standen was ultimately sentenced to 5 months in jail and ordered to repay a donation of €2,000 made by a local businessman. Although Standen's hair regrew and she eventually got out of jail, the trust she broke with her friends will never be rebuilt. It's a real shame she's married, guys. This one seems like a real catch. Number 2. Wrestling ties. Pro wrestler and son of pro wrestler, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, Brett DiBiase, found himself in a bit of a cobra clutch. This time, Ted and Brett's trouble began off the wrestling mats and in their wallets. The two were charged for state welfare money used for personal means. The spending included $160,000 for drug rehabilitation in Malibu, California, a $250,000 salary for a job Brett was unqualified for, $48,000 for Brett to teach the Department of Human Services employees how to identify possible drug use, $8,000 for Brett to stay at an upscale New Orleans hotel, and more. But Brett didn't find his way to state welfare money on his own. John Davis, Mississippi's leader of the Department of Human Services, redirected federal funds to his pet projects, like Brett DiBiase, while squandering money that was meant to support those in need. Ironically, while Brett was being paid generously to educate DHS employees about using, he was struggling with his own problems using substances. A few months later, mother and son, Nancy New and Zachary New, pled guilty to state charges of misusing welfare money. They were behind the nonprofit organization that fed the funds for Brett's drug rehab, airfare, hotels, and more. This wasn't the New's first stab at misusing welfare money. Prior to the DiBiase scandal, Nancy New helped direct millions in welfare funds to a pet project of another famous athlete, retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre. Nancy New funneled money in for the construction of a volleyball facility at the University of Southern Mississippi, where Favre's daughter was studying. While Favre wasn't charged in this particular welfare misspending case, the News were. For more on Brett Favre ripping off welfare funds, check this video out. Nancy faces a maximum sentence of 99 years with 25 to serve, and Zachary faces a maximum sentence of 75 years with 17 to serve. As for Brett DiBiase, the official sentencing hasn't yet been handed down. According to State Auditor White, the DiBiase case was the largest public embezzlement in state history, and if convicted on all counts, those charged face hundreds of years in prison. Number 1. Boobies Rock. Adam Shyrock, the founder of now-known fake charity Boobies Rock, faced charges for theft of $1 million or more, conspiracy to commit theft of $1 million or more, and charitable fraud in 2015. These fraud and theft charges were actually not linked to the well-known Boobies Rock Foundation, but rather for a mattress scam. Shyrock, along with co-conspirator Genevieve Cruz, had been obtaining certain mattresses and returning them under false pretenses. The two claimed that they were being donated to the Ecumenical Refugee and Immigration Services in Denver, Colorado for distribution to refugees. Shyrock's counterpart, Cruz, had been serving as the donation coordinator for the charity, but instead of donating the mattresses to those in need, the mattresses had mostly been sold for profit out of storage units. Shyrock was ordered to serve 6 months of jail time after the Serta mattress scam. The judge ruled that he had violated an order prohibiting him from engaging in or selling merchandise for any charitable use. This was Shyrock's second time in a single year that he had been jailed for disobeying that order. Adam Shyrock's first run-in with law enforcement began with his own fake charity, Boobies Rock. The charity is one of the most well-known fund and awareness-raising efforts for breast cancer, and it had limitless potential to be a huge beneficiary to those who suffer from breast cancer. The mission of the charity was to create awareness through fun, fashionable, and humorous clothing and accessories while donating proceeds of merchandise to cancer research. However, most of the proceeds had been landing in Shyrock's own pocket. Between June 2011 and December 2012, the main Boobies Rock bank account at Wells Fargo showed deposits of over $1 million. While funds were stacking up, Shyrock was withdrawing large sums from the charity's bank account for personal expenditures, such as funds to purchase a new BMW. He also dipped into the charity funds to pay his bar tabs and subscribe to an online dating service. Additionally, Boobies Rock was accused of using the names of actual breast cancer charities to seem more legitimate. Shyrock claimed that donations were being made to other breast cancer charities, such as the Young Survival Coalition. Former Boobies Rock employees began to stand up against the alleged charity and revealed that no donations had been made to the foundations that Shyrock claimed. In 2013, Boobies Rock and other offshoot charities of Shyrock were put on hold via a temporary restraining order, or TRO. Shyrock ignored the TRO and was sentenced to a mere 14 days in jail. In the next few years, Shyrock was in and out of court for other fake charitable schemes and fraud. Shyrock has gone through more fake charities than you can count on one hand. So what's his punishment? Shyrock was sentenced to 12 months in prison for failing to file a tax return for his Boobies Rock gains, and he was also ordered to pay $430,970 in restitution. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather have: free tickets to any sporting event for life or free gas for life.